Welcome to Southern Cooking Made Simple with Melanie. Today, we're going to take a little trip up through Little Laurel in Clay County, West Virginia, and visit the Fitzwaters' family. My dad, Charles Edward Fitzwaters, was born and raised in Little Laurel. There was 13 creek crossings to get to my dad's place up in the holler. He said that they moved a lot when he was young. He said every time you turn around, they was moving. Rent was hard to come by, so Papa worked very little. He had a little bit of a job on a gas drill when he was younger, but work was scarce here in the mountains. They had 5 children. They always had a garden. All the kids had to help them in the garden. When my dad grew up, he bought a 55 Chevy. He said that in those 13 creek crossings to get up to his house, he would wash his car in the creek going up to Grandma's house. My dad said that they walked to school uphill, through creeks, over the valley. He said it was uphill both ways, and they had to go over the valley and through the woods. 5 kids traipsing along to school every day. Grandma always cooked on an old wood cook stove. My grandma, she was an avid canner. She loved to can things up in a jar, and she would put anything she could get her hands on in a jar. She would can up pinto beans or beef stew or spaghetti sauce. Anything she could get her hands on, she would can it up for the winter. My grandma was very, very frugal. Life was much simpler back then in the mountains. Work was scarce, they had very little to work with, and they had to do the best with what they had. Work was hard, and the garden always needed tending, and the kids always helped with that. My grandma, if she had leftover sausage from breakfast, she would put that in a jar and can it up. It made no difference what she had left over. She would put that in a jar and seal it up, and then later when she needed another meal, she already had it prepared right there in a jar. They were very, very frugal with what they had, and she was so intelligent to learn how to can like that. People were really poor. Way back when, they were dirt poor. Beans, cornbread, and taters poor. They always had chickens. My dad said that they would go out in the yard and cross their legs when it was time to move. I suppose he had been chasing those chickens a lot to gather them up every time they had to move. Times were really tough, he said. 7 people to cook and clean for was a lot. My grandma's brother, Robert, he had a moonshine still up on the mountain from their house. Now, my dad said that my grandma, if the revenuers was around, she would hang the pants upside down on the clothesline to warn Robert to stay up on the hill. Family was all anybody had. Brothers, sisters, children, parents, grandparents, that's all they had. That and the mountains, and a whole lot of love. So he'd know if he saw the pants hanging upside down on the clothesline, not to come down off the mountain. My grandmother, she was a different type of a woman. She knew things. She was just different. She knew how to stop bleeding with a Bible verse. She knew how to remove seed warts without touching them. She told me one time I was little, I had a big old seed wart on the back of my foot. I said, Mama, look, I can't even hardly wear my shoe. It's hurting me so bad. She said, I'll give you 25 cents for that seed wart. She said, the only thing I don't want you to do is, the conditions are, if I buy it, don't look at it for 2 weeks. Now, I didn't look at that seed wart for 2 weeks, and the next time I looked at it, it was gone. And it was so big, I still have a scar on my heel from that seed wart. She was a very, very good seamstress. One time, when times were real rough, my grandma went down to Clay in town, and they had a place down there where women could go down there and sew, and they could make money for sewing, and my grandmother was an excellent seamstress. Oh, she was a good seamstress. She would sew up these beautiful quilts and stuff and sell them to people. They had a hard time making rent money, and my grandma, that's why they moved so much. And my grandma would make up those beautiful quilts and sell them to people. And I don't mean they were just patchwork quilts made out of blue jeans. I mean they were beautiful quilts, stuff that I have treasured, things that are every seam is perfect, all the collars match and blend so perfectly. She would get money for just taking quilts, and she would quilt those quilts for people. People would bring her quilts that they had already made, and she would quilt those together and turn them into a beautiful quilt. A very talented woman. Now, my grandpa, he worked at the gas drill some when he was younger. Jobs were very scarce and few and far between. And one time I remember he had a big scar on his chest from where he got burned at that gas drill. My grandpa was a real quiet man. He never said very much. They lived up in the mountains. They had their family to deal with, and the children and the people that they had in their family was all they had. That and their church family. We used to go up there and have a family reunion once a year up at Spread Park, right where you turn in to go up Little Laurel to my dad's place. And they would have a big party up there every year and in the summertime, and everybody would bring food and gather in there on the side of the riverbank and play music. All the family, people would come in from all over, people from Ohio, Virginia, all over the United States. People came out of that little holler up on Little Laurel to move all over in these United States. My Uncle Versal, Daddy's brother, he got a job at the FBI out in Washington, D.C. when times were real tough when he got older. And my dad got a job out there one time. He got laid off here in West Virginia down to alloy plant. And my dad moved up to Washington, D.C. to be near Versal to be able to work at the FBI. Now that sounds really important, but back then all he was doing was working in the mailroom. They didn't have computers back then. All they had was letters was how they communicated with people. And my dad got a job there working in the mailroom. Now later, my mother took a job working at the FBI when we lived up there. It was just a very short job, but she took a bus and went over into Washington, D.C., and she worked in filing at the FBI. We would move away, but we would always come back to our humble little house in Dixie, West Virginia, $35 a month. Well, I'll see everybody on the next video. Bye!